You know, it's funny. We humans have this deep, almost instinctual need to name things. A new puppy, a boat, even that little succulent on your windowsill. It's how we start to form a connection, right? How we begin to build a relationship. But what happens when we try to name the ultimate reality? What happens when we try to give a name to God? And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? That's really the heart of the challenge. We're trying to put a neat little label on something that, by its very nature, is way beyond any label we could come up with. So, where do you even start?
Well, one thing is for sure. Naming is about more than just identification. It's the first step to having any kind of relationship. I mean, think about Moses at the burning bush. The first thing he wants to know is, what is your name? He needed something personal, something he could hold on to, and honestly, so do we.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this huge idea, we're going to use one single, powerful analogy for this entire explainer. Let's think of this whole process as building a map.
So I want you to just imagine with me for the next few minutes. Imagine that God isn't some abstract philosophical concept, but a vast, living, conscious star sitting right at the center of all reality. And we're the observers living on the planets that orbit it.
So here's the breakdown. It's pretty simple. The living star, that's God. We, humanity, we're the planetary observers, just trying to figure it all out. And all our beliefs, our doctrines, and especially our names for God, well, those are our maps and our charts, our very best attempts to describe this incredible, massive reality we're a part of. All right, let's start making our first set of maps. Naturally, the first thing our observers would do is try to map the star's physical properties. In theology, these are what we call God's natural attributes. This is basically the physics of our star. And this is where the analogy really starts to shine, right? It takes these huge, kind of abstract concepts and makes them, well, real. Omniscience, being all-knowing, is just the star's light, which literally touches and reveals everything. Omnipotence, all-powerful, that's its immense gravity, holding the whole solar system together. And omnipresence, that's its energy, a constant warmth and influence felt on every single planet all the time.
And this isn't some new idea. The psalmist, you could think of him as one of our ancient observers, felt that constant, inescapable presence of the star. He looked up and wrote this. It's this beautiful way of saying there is nowhere in the system you can go where the star's influence isn't felt.
But here's the thing. A map of the star's physics only gets you so far, because pretty soon our observers realize this star has a character, a nature. And it's defined by this stunning paradox that is both absolutely terrifying and beautifully life-giving.
So on one hand, you have the star's corona, this intensely pure, superheated plasma. It is unapproachably powerful. It's a boundary you simply cannot cross. This represents God's holiness, his profound sheer otherness. But then, from that very same terrifying source, comes the gentle light and warmth that makes all life possible. And that represents God's love. You see the paradox? Holiness creates this immense distance, and love crosses it.
You know, what's really interesting is that holiness is probably the primary description of God in the Bible. And it doesn't just mean morally perfect. It means being of a completely different order of reality. For our observers, the star isn't just a bigger, hotter version of their planet. It is fundamentally, completely other.
So how in the world is that gap of otherness bridged? The answer is love. This life-giving light is an act of self-giving. The star is pouring out its own energy, sending it across the vast, cold emptiness of space, just to create and sustain life. That is the very essence of love, reaching out from the very heart of holiness.
Okay, everything we've talked about so far is just the setup, because now we get to the most paradigm-shifting discovery our observers could ever make, a discovery that changes all of their maps forever.
They realize the star isn't just a thing. It's not just a giant ball of gas governed by physics. It's a person. It is self-conscious. It's aware of them. It communicates. It isn't just a what, it's a who. And that right there is the core claim we find in the biblical sources. God is personal.
And once you realize that, just think about it. Your old scientific charts about gravity and light spectrums, they just don't cut it anymore, do they? You need a whole new kind of map, a relational map. You stop just describing what the star is made of, and you start trying to describe who this star is, to you.
And these are just some of the beautiful personal maps they created. When they felt guided and cared for, they called the star a shepherd. When they felt safe and totally secure, they named it their rock or their fortress. See, these aren't chemical compositions. They're names that are born out of a real, lived relationship.
And here's a perfect example. Take this famous line from Martin Luther. He was an observer who, right in the middle of a life filled with chaos and danger, experienced the star's unwavering, steady presence. The map he drew from that experience, the name he gave it, was a mighty fortress.
But, and this is a really important but, we have to remember that every single one of these maps is drawn by human hands, and that means they're all, by nature, imperfect. Our human words like king or father can be incredibly helpful pointers, but they also come loaded with all of our own flawed human experiences and baggage. The map is never ever the territory.
So if all our maps are flawed and incomplete, what's the point? Why even bother making them? Well, that question brings us to the ultimate purpose of this entire journey.
You know, one of the early church observers, a guy named Cyril of Jerusalem, he absolutely nailed it. He said that true wisdom isn't about having the most perfect, detailed map. It's about the humility of admitting that our understanding will always, always be just a tiny fraction of the full reality. It's an act of worship, really, not despair.
And that's really the whole point, isn't it? We can spend our entire lives arguing about whose map is better, which name is more precise, and completely miss the reason we have the map in the first place. The goal isn't to create the perfect map of the star. The goal is to step outside, feel its warmth, and actually live in its light.
And that's the question I really want to leave you with today. If all our theology, all our words, all our precious names for God are just maps pointing toward a much bigger reality, then what does it actually look like to put the map down for a minute and go explore the territory for yourself?